I don't remember a time when I didn't feel small, like I was a shadow hovering around the edges of someone else's life. My mother wasn't just the center of everything. She was everything. She was the sun, the moon, the stars, and we were all just planets, orbiting, bending to her gravity. It wasn't love, it was need. A need so consuming, so absolute, that I could never measure up. She always made it clear, in her own way, that her love was conditional. If I was good enough, if I did what she wanted, if I reflected her back to herself in the way she wanted to be seen, then there were crumbs of affection. But even those were fleeting, as if she could never truly give, because she was never truly satisfied. There was always something else she needed from me: validation, admiration, attention. Her mood was a storm, and we, my father and I, were just leaves caught in it. I don't know if I can even say I had a childhood, not the way other kids did. I was always aware of her needs before my own. I learned to read her moods early on, as if they were the weather, unpredictable and dangerous. When she was happy, it felt like an illusion, fragile, like glass, ready to shatter at the slightest crack. When she was angry, it felt like the ground could open beneath me. As I got older, the tension between us grew more palpable. I remember when I started to pull away, just a little, going to my room more often, reading, escaping into books and music. She didn't like that. She needed me to be there, all the time, as a reflection of her greatness, her importance. I was supposed to be proud of her, to admire her constantly, to follow her lead, but I couldn't. She would accuse me of being ungrateful, of not appreciating her sacrifices. She would tell me I was selfish, unloving, cold. These were the words she used to manipulate me, to make me doubt myself, to make me feel like the one who was failing. I remember one day when I was 15, I told her I wanted to go to art school to study painting. It was a small dream of mine, one I hadn't even fully formed. But she looked at me, cold and distant, and said, "You're too stupid to be an artist. You'll never make it. You'll always need me." I wanted to cry, to scream, but I didn't. I'd learned long ago that showing weakness was a mistake. Vulnerability in her world meant punishment, whether that came in the form of silence, cruelty, or some twisted version of love. It wasn't the love I needed, but the love she needed to feel powerful. So I retreated further. It became easier over time, to disappear, to keep my thoughts to myself, to keep my dreams quiet, to let her voice drown mine out. It wasn't just her words, though. It was her actions, the constant undermining, the way she would make everything about her, even my own successes. If I did well in school, she would tell people it was because of her discipline. If I won a prize, it was because of her encouragement, even though I didn't remember asking for any. There was no space for me to exist as my own person. Every part of me was either borrowed from her or dismissed as unimportant. I started to feel invisible, but not in the way that's peaceful, in the way that allows you to quietly find yourself. It was a suffocating kind of invisibility, a silence that wrapped around me like a noose. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. Every time I tried to be myself, she would dismiss it as nonsense, or worse, accuse me of being too much. I became smaller and smaller in her presence, until one day I realized there was nothing left of me. And I think in some way she liked it. She liked that I was dependent on her, that I needed her approval for everything. But it never came. Nothing was ever enough. By the time I left for college, I was barely a person. I was an echo of what she had made me. I had no real sense of self, no idea who I was without her critical eye watching my every move. Leaving felt like cutting off an arm. I wasn't sure I could survive without her. But the truth was, I didn't know who I was without her control. So, I left, hoping that the distance would give me the space to find out. Now, years later, I've made my peace with the fact that I'll never have the kind of relationship with her that other daughters might. I've spent so much of my life trying to please her, to meet her impossible standards, and I've come to understand that it was never about me. It was always about her need to be adored, to be worshipped. to be at the center of everything. And I will never be able to give that to her. I've chosen to be alone, not in the sense of being lonely, though I won't pretend that I don't feel that sometimes, but in the sense of being free. Being alone means not having to bend myself to anyone else's expectations, not having to shrink into a version of myself that's palatable to someone else. Being alone means the space to finally breathe. I know this choice might seem strange to some, but after years of trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me, being alone feels like freedom. It feels like reclaiming the parts of myself that I lost, the parts that didn't belong to her, the parts that were mine. I've learned that I don't need validation from anyone, least of all her. I don't need her approval, her praise, her love. I need nothing but my own acceptance, and that's a kind of peace I never thought I'd find. So yes, I've chosen to be alone, but in this solitude, I am learning to live for myself. I am learning to love the woman I am, broken, scarred, but finally free. Even now, I can't entirely escape the guilt. It's like a quiet hum in the back of my mind, always there, waiting to rise when I least expect it. I sometimes wonder if she misses me, or if she even knows that I've stepped away. When she does call and I don't answer, a small voice inside me asks, what if she's dying? What if something happens and I'm not there? But then I remind myself that it's not my responsibility to save her. It never was. Her version of love was never love. It was an endless, draining demand. She needed me, not as a daughter, but as a mirror that reflected back her own importance. Her phone calls are full of complaints, of how hard her life is, of how much she's done for me, of how ungrateful I am when I don't jump at her beck and call. The guilt washes over me when I hear her voice. She's so desperate for validation, for someone to acknowledge her sacrifices. She doesn't understand that I cannot be the one to offer it anymore, not in the way she wants, not in a way that leaves me empty and broken. But there's something in me that's learned to push past that guilt, something deeper, something that's finally taking root. I've started to understand that the guilt isn't love, it's conditioning. It's what she taught me to feel, to think. It's the tool she used to control me. The truth is, I'm learning to forgive myself for needing space. I'm learning that my decision to step away isn't a betrayal. It's an act of survival. It's the only way I could ever hope to be whole again. For the first time in my life, I'm not fighting for her approval. I'm not living to fulfill her needs. And that freedom, that sweet, painful freedom, is a feeling I didn't know I was capable of. Still, I struggle with the moments when I feel torn, the moments when I miss the idea of what I thought a mother-daughter relationship could be. I don't think I'll ever stop wishing for the possibility that she could love me in a real way, without strings, without manipulation, without making me feel small. But I know now that that's a fantasy. That woman, the mother I hoped she could be, doesn't exist. And if she did, she wouldn't be my mother. I've started therapy recently. It's hard to admit that because in some ways it feels like admitting defeat. It feels like I've failed in the one thing I was supposed to get right, my relationship with my mother. But the therapist's office is the only place where I can talk openly about what I lived through. It's the only place where I can say that, yes, she made me feel like I wasn't enough, and not be met with judgment, but with compassion. And slowly, I'm unlearning the things she taught me. Slowly, I'm learning how to trust myself, how to ask myself what I really want, without the constant noise of her demands echoing in my head. For so long, I lived like her puppet, and now I'm teaching myself how to stand on my own 2 feet, but I won't pretend it's easy. Some days I miss her, despite everything. I miss the illusion of what I thought love could be, and I miss the dream of having a mother who could love me for who I am, not for what I could give her. On those days, the loneliness feels too heavy, too overwhelming, and I catch myself wishing that things could have been different. But I know now that I can't live in those what-ifs. What I have now is a quiet kind of peace, one that grows stronger with each passing day. It's not the loud, confident peace that shouts at the world that everything is fine. It's a softer, quieter peace, one that understands the complexity of my past and doesn't need to erase it to move forward. It's a peace that allows me to be alone, but not lonely, to be with myself without feeling broken or incomplete. For the first time, I can say that I am learning to be enough. I am enough. I am more than enough, and someday I'll believe it completely.